That's right. Jack Nicholson and The Shining. We're back. Yeah, I know you missed us. We heard. I got a worrisome note from Janice Dabrowski. Are you guys okay? Are you thinking about quitting the podcast, or words to that effect? I guess the thought did occur to me while Mike was away. Man, life is pretty good without worrying about.
I think about quitting this shit every morning at 4:15 a.m. when I get up, but I don't do it because I'm not a baby. You guys need to have more faith. Good Lord.
Well, so so here's the unvarnished truth about what happened. Mike took some well-deserved time away with the woman who he married and who stands by his side in spite of his many failings, the failings that we see here on the air every morning at 8 a.m. So they're gone, and he sends me instructions about how to hook up to Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble. And they arrive at about 1 o'clock in the morning before he's leaving the next morning. So I get up the next morning and I look at them and I'm thinking, man, any idiot can follow these instructions. Mike should write instruction manuals. This is pretty cool. So I start going and I think I'm getting into it.
That's a great compliment, Norm. I thought I did pretty well with that as well. I mean, I'm getting it, I'm ahead of vacation. I think the last minute thing I had like on my to-do list, like 4 or 5 things to knock down. And one of them was stream instructions for Norm. And I'm not going to put them up for everybody, but it was, I don't know how many pages it would have been, just by typing, but it wasn't a short list. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So much so that I felt bad about how thorough the instructions were at the point that I delivered them. But what else was I going to do? I mean, for what it's worth, Rumble should get off of its butt and get a static stream key that it says it's been cooking for however long. That would cut it all in half, Norm. You would have been swimming in open ocean had you not had to deal with setting up a separate stream key and configuration for Rumble in addition to setting up the stuff through our normal streaming platform. So
that was what I'm doing. So I got, I thought I had the Rumble thing figured out. And then I couldn't figure out how to do the other things. So then I thought, okay, I'll just go with what we got. And I get on and I look on the screen and I'm thinking, hey, there's me. But why am I on twice? And why is there this echo? And so I tried to screw with it some and, of course, didn't leave myself enough time. That was day 1. Day 2, I tried it a little bit earlier and ended up with the same result. And by day 3, I thought, you know what? We're taking the week off. So welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Rumors of our dissolution and death have been greatly exaggerated.
It's true. It's true.
We're here. Welcome back. Did you have a good time away, Mike?
I had a great time. Much needed. And I think I was sharing with you several things. Let me see if I can add. Look what we got here. We got our Rumble chat in here. I'll have to mess with this a little bit. But I had a great time. I think that what I learned is that we, meaning myself and my wife and my son, we should be better about doing that more. And by more, I just mean, we should be better about creating the opportunity and the time to go on vacation. And I think I told you that I was, it took me 2 or 3 days to really begin. I think I call it unspooling, right? It's difficult to describe how tightly wound one can get under stress and, with focus on multiple things. And, I felt, when we initially got to where we were going, it was difficult to really unwind. I still felt like I was on go mode for a good 24 to 36 hours, and it didn't make sense. We were quite literally in paradise, right? There were no worries.
Mike discerns somehow that I am having difficulties. He says, I'll get on the stream with you tomorrow morning. Don't worry. And I sent him a note back. Go on vacation. Take a break. So I got to enjoy his vacation too. But I thought the real reason that Mike went, didn't want to surface on Law and Legitimacy. He couldn't face the standings in the Ball and Legitimacy Fantasy Football League because as we speak, there's only one undefeated team ranked number 1 in the league. And whose team is that, Mike?
Well, that may be the objectors, and I can't argue with that. I still haven't even addressed that fact, but I took that I took that butt beating by one of my good friends who helped me start this league for Ball and Legitimacy. And high society, if you're out there, that was unnecessary. What you did to me was absolutely unnecessary.
That was a thorough posterior kicking. I don't think I'd ever seen anybody put up that many points in a fantasy football game. He had high society had enough points for, I can't say 2 weeks, but there are some teams in the league he might have beat 2 weeks in a row with those points. But it was a good week for fantasy football. Had an interesting conversation with Jacqueline, the owner of Victoria's Secrets. She could barely talk to me because her team was ahead all day. But then at the end of the day, her quarterback threw an interception. His team was ahead. They had to run out the clock, so he wasn't going to pick up any more passing yardage. And the rest, they say, is history. But let's move on.
I want one quick exercise here because we can get into some of these things. But before we move on, I got the feeling that some of our viewers, listeners, were how should I say this? Suspicious that the truth was as boring as what we just described. That I went on vacation and that Norm Pattis and all of his wisdom and technical savvy was unable to configure the stream and run it in my absence. In fact, there were many people who thought that that something had happened between us. So knowing that is not the truth, and setting aside how I guess mistrusting everybody is of us, that we wouldn't be truthful with you. What were your theories? And just throw them in the chat, and we'll read some off as they come in. But I know that there were several theories that were floating out there, and I got a couple of emails as well. Norm, I know people reached out to you. I got a couple of emails as well, but I was on vacation. TC. Oh, the travesty, right?
I think odds are people thought you finally traded up. And I mean, I worried about that they weren't coming back. Dawn McNeil, she's taunting me for now because I play Dawn's team next week. And, realistically, I'm likely to get clocked. But the last 2 weeks running, my team were underdogs, and they'll be underdogs this week. And I will call them up, my members, and give them a pep talk. My theory is Norm is a boomer with tech. She's absolutely right. There are two things in the world that I can trust: books and newspapers. All this digital crap drives me crazy. But I was telling Mike, and there's money to be made in this. If somebody wants to do this, I'll attend. If somebody put together a 10-day digital boot camp where people could go and learn the basics of how all their devices work, I would spend good money for that. Because here's proof about what Mike was saying. My wife was out of town last weekend as well, but not with Mike, so far as I know. Yeah, and so I was in Vermont, and of course I want to turn the television on to watch the Michigan Wolverines. But the fact that we're in northern Vermont and you got to stream and hook one thing up to the other thing, I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I'm on the phone with my wife, and she's trying to calmly walk it through. She's a professional. She's a clinical psychologist. That's what it takes to be married to me. And so she's giving me my best I can deal with psycho tone of voice, and I'm feeling patronized, and I just blew up. And so the Digitopia failed me entirely. Folks, find us a program. We'll attend. Mayhew, you think a liberal judge kidnapped you in court for using your First Amendment? Yeah, that could be. Let's talk. Let's pivot while the theories pop in. What do you think of Donald Trump and the judge in Manhattan who is presiding in a court trial over the fraud charges against Trump, imposing a gag order on Trump? Trump was on Truth Media, and he was making tart observations about the judge's clerk, his senior clerk, and her political affiliations. And the court then issued a gag order. Unprecedented. And in my mind, entirely unjustified. The theory of gag orders is that the court has inherent supervisory power to assure that both sides get a fair trial. And we've talked about this before, and I'm choosing my words carefully. Now, in a criminal case, it's only the defendant who has a right, a constitutional right, under the Sixth Amendment to a fair trial. It's not the government. The government has no Sixth Amendment rights. Read the document. It speaks for itself. But the court nonetheless has inherent supervisory power to see that justice is done. The issuance of a gag order evokes First Amendment rights. It's a prior restraint. The justification for gag orders is typically that that untoward speech will have an untoward effect or bad effect on jurors. There is no jury here, folks. This wackadoodle judge is presumed to follow the law and presumed to be beyond influence by such things as media. And so issuing a gag order, which sounds in concerns for the integrity of the jury process in a court trial, makes no sense. And if Donald Trump had any cojones left, because they're spread so far over the country, I think what he would do would be to immediately challenge this in an appellate court. It is uncalled for, unwarranted, and does support the suspicion that he's raised that this is a form basically of election interference, all these prosecutions. So I stand with the Donald on this one. I think he's wrong. I think it's also unusual that this judge in a court trial issued a summary judgment ruling deciding some of the issues in the case days before he was going to sit over the trial. Summary judgment usually takes from a jury the right to make a decision and says that as a result of the material facts in a case that are not in dispute, there's nothing for the jury to decide and the court can decide it. What was the point of having a summary judgment ruling in a court trial days before the court trial began, other than to load and stack the deck against the Donald? Shame on you, Judge. Well, do we know what this judge's name is?
Someone in the chat likely does, but I think the
he looks like he's sitting on a car battery with the electrodes attached to a part of his anatomy that would better not be exposed to a car battery. I mean, this just hey ho ho. This is a judge that's got to go.
Well, the one thing that kind of made its way into my timeline during so TC is saying Angeron, is that Angeron?
I thought it was with an E, but Angeron is actually, actually more apt. I got my anger on,
one thing was the valuation of the Mar-a-Lago estate at an astoundingly low $18 million. Is the news that made its way into my timeline. I think that was based, and I'll reverse course and go back and try and make sure I understand the issue appropriately there. I know that is being appealed, but I believe that was based on tax value, which, if true, is one of the most laughable, I guess, instances of obvious incompetence on the bench that we could, in recent memory, that a judge would, accept that and move on.
Exorcism is the cure for that, Judge Dawn notes. Look at that smile. I couldn't help but wonder whether there was a little grandstanding. I mean, when he mugs for the camera in a way that makes Barbara Bellis, the judge in the Alex Jones case, look modest. Exorcism may be the answer. Hey, let's look on the theme of all things Trump today. I hope we get beyond him. We may not. The Supreme Court. There is discussion now. We'll get to the Supreme Court in a moment. There is discussion now apropos the vacancy in the House that Donald Trump could be Speaker of the House. And so I don't think there is a universe in which he would get a majority of House members to vote for him. But it raises the question, could Donald Trump or could a non-congressman be made Speaker of the House? Until the question arose this week, I had always assumed that in order to be Speaker of the House, you had to be a member of the House, an elected member of the body. However, if you look at the text of the Constitution, it doesn't say that. And similarly, you always assume that a Supreme Court justice would have to be a lawyer. It doesn't have to be. Could Donald Trump be appointed or elected by House members as Speaker? That might be a tempting move for some of them, because then you'd claim that he was somehow had some sort of legislative immunity from pending litigation. All these court suits that lawsuits that he's involved in, both civilly and criminally, would distract him from presiding over the House, and he might be able to leverage that into an argument that he's immune from suit, at least during the pendency of his speakership. But this would tee up directly the issue that is percolating around the country right now, and that is the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The argument that because he had engaged in insurrection, or the argument that because he'd offered aid and comfort to those who had, therefore he's ineligible to serve. And so that would apply, I think, on its face, to the office of Speaker of the House as well. Again, I don't think anybody's seriously going to entertain a vote for him as House Speaker. I do think the 14th Amendment Section 3 argument is one that we need to have over and over again. And Mike, you brought to my attention the U.S. Supreme Court rebuffing the bid to disqualify Trump. What happened and why is it important?
Well, I think the overarching theme here is that we're going to begin seeing these. There are several cases, to my understanding, that are active on this issue under the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment argument of eligibility, or challenges to the eligibility to appear on the presidential ballot. This one actually, this is interesting as well, because the facts, it's Castro v. Trump. And I can scroll here just to weigh in on who Castro is. So the gentleman's name is John Anthony Castro. Apparently, he is a Texas tax consultant who also is seeking to be the nominee for the Republican Party for president in 2024. And he launched the lawsuit challenging and seeking Trump's disqualification pursuant to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The court did not hear the case. It just sort of, it met the same fate that the overwhelming majority of petitions for certiorari before the United States Supreme Court ultimately meet. But as this article points out, and it was an issue of standing, as I understand. But ultimately, what this article points out is really here toward the bottom, right? That other legal efforts to disqualify Trump based on the 14th Amendment are underway, including a September 6th lawsuit filed by a nonpartisan group, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, to try to block Trump from appearing on the presidential ballot in Colorado if he wins the Republican nomination. And I think, when I was sent this article, this article was sent to me by someone that watches and listens to nearly every stream. And the context for the article was, you two were right that this is the issue. You two were right that this is the issue that is that will be within the crosshairs as we head into 2024. So a little bit of a pat on the back to you and me, Norm, in terms of being able to look at something from the distance and analyze that this is likely going to be something that grows in importance. Whether and I think at the time I said it does not matter whether there is any sort of legitimate chance that this method might work. What we have seen with Trump over the course of the last 7 years now, which is wild, but over the course of the last 7 years, it is a war of attrition. Right. It is constantly sending bodies, metaphorically speaking, to the front lines, right, to the trenches. And this is not an issue of whether this is that magic bullet that will ultimately do it. It is nothing more, nothing less than, number one, putting Trump in a position as a defendant in more and more and more litigation, which is exorbitantly expensive, right? And continuing to mount pressure in a more cumulative manner. So I expect that this is not legally. I don't expect that this is going to work. I also am not ruling out that some sort of rogue Secretary of State in one or more blue-controlled states might just make some sort of conclusion as to the suitability of this remedy and removing him or blocking him from appearing on a ballot in a state. That to me is nearly an act of war. It's almost an act of secession, if you will, from my vantage point. But this is just to kind of update all of our viewers and listeners. We'll start to see more of this as we head into the end of the year.
Yeah, I think so. And you can thank that law review article, by that we refer to. I don't recall the author's name. So that they basically, it was an article that's set to appear in a law review published next year, but it was leaked to the press and published broadly on the SSRN network to encourage local officials to act, telling them that if you've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, you have a duty not to place someone like Trump on the ballot because of his conduct on January 6th, even absent any independent judicial fact-finding. As you all know, given my involvement in the Proud Boys case and other J6 cases, I view the prosecutions there as wildly exaggerated and the Justice Department's position as extravagant and unsupported by law and bad for the Republic. But hey, what do I know? I just work for a living. Here's a hypothesis, though, that I want to share with you. I aired it first this morning with a friend I was speaking to and then talked briefly with Mike about it. I'm going to say the following, and I'm going to ask you to think about it. But first, put your coffee down so you don't spit it out, and put both hands on the wheel if you're driving and focus on a landmark. I think Donald Trump is the only unifying factor we have left in the United States right now. That's right. You heard it. Donald Trump is the last unifying factor we have in the United States right now. Here's what I mean by that. Love him or hate him, he is the focus of so much of our national debate right now. The Republicans and the MAGA Republicans love him. Rhino Republicans hate him. Together with Democrats, they hate him. And it's Donald. And Donald has drawn out of the woodwork a new force in American life. I'll call it the AFBC. What's that? The angry fat black chick, Fannie appropriately named Willis and her ilk, who are going to take him down in the name of taking down white supremacy. And of course, those who support Donald feel forgotten, whether white, black, brown, or otherwise. And the result is that Donald is at the center of a whirlwind. And the whirlwind of American politics that is pulling us apart now is focused on Donald. And as I drove into work this morning, I thought, what's going to happen when Trump dies? All the energy that focuses on that whirlwind is still going to be out there, and there's not going to be a unifying factor. So I say today is give thanks for Donald Trump Day and try to focus on the coal mine rather than the canary today, folks, because Donald is of an age where he will soon depart us. And when he does, we're going to be left alone with our discontent, our hatred, our sorrows, and our divisions. And then what are we going to do?
Well, I mean, to your point, this article was mentioned on Timcast IRL, I believe. So the title reads, Donald Trump followers targeted by FBI as 2024 election nears.
What does that mean?
And it says the challenge for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the primary federal agency charged with law enforcement, is to pursue and prevent what it calls domestic terrorism without direct reference to political parties or affiliations. Even though the vast majority of its current anti-government investigations are of Trump supporters, according to classified data obtained by Newsweek. So effectively, the Department of Justice has now labeled Trump supporters as being co-aligned with that broader topic heading of domestic terror threats.
It's interesting you should say that, because I was talking to a federal prosecutor yesterday about filings in the Owen Schroyer case. Owen Schroyer is one of Alex Jones's personalities on InfoWars, and he's facing a 60-day sentence. We're appealing on grounds that he's being sentenced to imprisonment for trespass because of speech. And so as the conversation wound down, the prosecutor said, I spent an interesting hour the other day watching television. I said, yeah. He said, yeah, you and Owen, your press conference after his sentencing that day. And I said, why in the world would you spend an hour watching us? And he said, because I'm the government. And I said, well, clearly you don't have enough to do. And, you've got too much time on your hands. And that conversation ended. So, Uncle Sam, if you're watching, I know I said that Merrick Garland is the Jean Valjean of American politics. The Inspector Javert of American politics. Inspector Javert being the man who hounded Jean Valjean and Victor Hugo's Les Mis, and who in the end was undone by his own sense of self-righteousness, threw himself off a bridge into the Seine. And yes, I did say, Merrick can't find a bridge soon enough. Does that make me a domestic terrorist? Does that make Law and Legitimacy a domestic terrorist? If we're mad as hell about what's going on in this country and we don't want to take it any longer, does that make us domestic terrorists? At what point did bend and spread or trust and obey, the old fundamentalist Christian camp song, become the new national anthem? We're supposed to be distrustful of government. We created it. And when it doesn't serve our ends, we have a right to bitch, we have a right to moan, and we have a right to rebel. And if the government can't take it, so much the worse for government. At least that's my view.
Yeah, it does appear to me that the governing, I guess, apparatus, we'll call it, the establishment and its interests, its prerogatives, it is sufficiently dislocated from that of the needs or the attention of the citizenry, and the citizenry is being punished for pointing that out.
And nowhere is this becoming more apparent than in the immigration crisis. An interesting story, I don't recall in which paper this morning.
NBC.
Oh, it's on NBC, about immigration, and the influx of immigrants is reaching historic levels. The number who came in September was an all-time high for any month, I believe. 200,000 people unlawfully entered the United States. That's the estimate. Many of them are being shipped to sanctuary cities in the north, and people like Mayor Adams in New York are crying uncle. New York won't exist any longer if we keep having to absorb 10,000 people a month. Adams is now going on a tour of Latin American countries to find out why folks want to come here so much, and to see what he can do to deter the flow. There's probably nothing that he can do, but what's interesting is that both Democrats and Republicans are beginning to cry uncle. There's only so much more that we can sustain. Here is my view. I don't have a broader sense of a conspiracy in the world where, the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and whatnot get together and decide how the rest of us shall live. But I do think that there are global forces that are converging to make the world into a different place. And those global forces are largely served by big data and those who own them. And I think the immigration debate, I'd like to reframe as one, it's not the great replacement theory. That's Tucker Carlson talking about how there's a conspiracy to replace white people in the United States with brown people. I just don't buy that. What I do believe is there's something like the great dilution going on. And that is, in the name of global equity, everybody is supposed to live the same way. And the United States is still an oasis of privilege by contrast to the lives that most people are compelled to live around the world. And in the name of global equity, until the standard of living in the United States is diluted such that it's on par with the standard of living elsewhere, there won't be equity. So until we become as miserable as the third world, people will have an incentive to enter this country. When we become as miserable, they won't. And until they become as miserable, there'll be no serious effort at global equity. So I believe that those who believe in global equity and globalism favor open borders, favor an immigration policy that permits people to go wherever they feel the need to go. And I think the American public is having a backlash. Just this week, the Centers for Disease Control published more statistics, once again, on the declining standard of life in the United States and increasing mortality rates. Our mortality rates, our death, we're living less long than we used to in this country. We're dying younger. And we're dying younger because we're becoming more like the rest of the world. And we're becoming more like the rest of the world because we can't say no to people who want to enter. And the result is we have cities that are becoming unlivable. New York City. We have economic consequences that we can't face. And come this winter, we'll have true humanitarian crises as weather turns cold. And we've got many homeless Americans and homeless immigrants with no place to go but the empty rooms in your house. Now, is that a little bit dramatically put? Yes, but not so much so as to be beyond the realm of imagination. Hundreds of thousands of people are streaming into this country on an annual basis, maybe 200,000 according to this report on NBC last month in Texas alone. And they continue to come, and we don't have an immigration policy. We can't say no because that's inhumane, but we can't accommodate the folks that come in and maintain our standard of living. And the result is an irrational anger and a sense of hopelessness that is pushing people into despair and populist politics that sometimes are ugly. something, and Donald Trump is at the center of that debate. He brought it to us in 2016, and he's still out there trying to do it when people pay attention to him. Donald Trump will not disappear from American politics because the forces that his anger and his populism reflect are real. And both political parties refuse to deal with them in realistic ways. And the result is he's taking it to the people who are feeling the rage that comes of a sense of loss of control of their own lives. And that's the drama of American politics. What's happened to Vivek? Dawn asked earlier, Vivek Ramaswamy. There was an interesting story this morning about maybe having to cancel the rest of the Republican debates because they've become a charade and maybe embarrassing. Trump is going to be the nominee. So why are we continuing to have debates as though there's any serious question about what's going to happen? Trump is going to be the nominee because he is the unifying factor in American politics. Love him or hate him, he's the only politician who is a litmus test of the rage that exists on the streets of America as we lose control of our country in a world gone suddenly mad.
Well, and to be candid with you, and hey, Freedom Lover, good morning to you. Thank you for the welcome back. I believe I am becoming a single issue voter as we move into 2024. And this is that issue. It is immigration. And I don't think that I'm wrong to be thinking in that manner. To me, immigration is a microcosm of everything plaguing our republic at the moment, right? It is a lens to the economic crisis, right? It is a lens to the absolute dislocation of our elected politicians, and in combination with the administrative and regulatory agencies that Congress has delegated authority to from the needs and the desires and the vision of the common good, as we sometimes refer, Norm, among the citizenry. And it also represents this interesting sort of, as Scott Adams would say, 2 movies, 1 screen phenomenon, where depending politically where one finds him or herself, the issue of immigration is either a non-issue, it's something simply to drum up fear and support for votes, or it is a legitimate crisis that the West appears unprepared to meet with an effective solution. I'm thinking back to watching Elon Musk's video where Elon Musk traveled to Eagle Pass, one of the towns along in Texas along the border, near the border there, where immigrants and migrants are just hopping onto trains. Apparently, they have figured out how to toggle the brake system in certain parts of these tracks, and so they're able to slow these trains such that migrants who have been able to get into the country are able to load up on top of these trains and make it hundreds of miles inland across the U.S. border. And what I resent about this article that I've got on the screen here, I'm going to read from it briefly, and then we'll end this. But the article says, quote, now that has prominent voices beyond politicians trying to drive the conversation. Tech billionaire Elon Musk visited the Texas border with Mexico last week, posting in a video selfie on X, formerly known as Twitter, that the situation is beyond insane and growing fast, and called for the overhaul of a legal immigration system that also bars migrants, quote, breaking the law. Musk is himself an immigrant from South Africa and called himself extremely pro-immigrant, Reuters reported. A.J. Bauer, an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Alabama who focuses on right-wing media, said ratcheting up of hardline language is only going to embolden the anti-immigrant sentiment rather than provide actual solutions. This is such a disingenuous juxtaposition of who Elon Musk is, what he did, and then this numbskull assistant professor of journalism. How do you juxtapose an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Alabama alongside Elon Musk? Number one, I don't understand that juxtaposition.
Elon Musk look, it all goes back to Jean Raspail and Camp of the Saints. And I guarantee you, if you picked up the phone and called A.J. Bauer over there in Alabama, he'd tell you that was a racist book. but it's not a racist book. It's a book about what people do when their country undergoes an invasion.
But Norm, and that's right. So the point that Elon was making, because he met there with elected officials, right, and sheriffs of the nearby towns, and he put them on camera to tell the American people statistics and anecdotal evidence of what they are seeing, what is going on, why they are ill-equipped because their towns are, very small. So one of them only had a police force of like 16 officers or something like that. And they're supposed to deal with the influx of a couple thousand migrants every week or every couple of weeks. And it's so this sort of I guess juxtaposition to me is exactly the reason that there is this populist movement that harbors itself on the center right.
No, AJ Bauer is part of the problem. He's in denial. And he doesn't trust his own eyes. He believes his ideology. We've got an assistant professor of journalism who's now an expert on immigration and American politics. Come on, AJ. Now, I'd say we should get him as a guest on the show, but I don't think we should, because I think I would heap scorn and abuse on him, and it would be a discredit to us all. Instead, we should trust our own eyes, talk to one another, and ask ourselves what's going on in the coal mine we call America. We should thank Donald Trump for being the canary that draws everybody's attention to the crisis in the coal mine. But the coal mine is real. Americans are dying. Communities are disintegrating. And we're losing a sense of national hope and purpose. Vivek has gotten lost in all of this. And I'm not sure what's up with that. I don't know if the bump from his early enthusiasm is evening out. We're back. We'll figure out what's going on with Vivek, and we'll report more on it in the days to come.
Vivek, he talks a lot. And in substantively, he says a lot. This is just sort of my parting thought here. But coincidentally, Vivek is the only other candidate on the Republican side of the platform that has a firm and well-articulated stance on the border issue, the border crisis, right? And so while everybody else is sort of mealy-mouthed around what to do about this issue, or, trying to point fingers at, some other issue that may be creating that, Vivek is the only one saying, rescind the H-1B visa program, right? Make it a merit-based immigration system. Remove the caps. Bring in quality people. Secure the border by force, right? Use the military to secure the border. Call it what it is, as we've said before, an invasion. He's articulated these things. So perhaps I'm just as confused as you are as to why he's lost some momentum, but I think this is sort of the dog days of political summer in terms of a presidential campaign. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm sure that we will see him ramp back up in the next couple of months. But I also think that some of those really shoddy takedown efforts on the political right from the likes of Rogan O'Hanley, even Anomaly, just mind-numbingly dumb takedown efforts against Vivek, they have millions of viewers. And so that's not an insignificant bump, or I guess speed bump for Vivek, is actually overcoming some of the illegitimate criticism that still lands because of who those people are in the political talking head space. So for whatever that's worth.
Trust your eyes, folks. America's on fire. Be a fireman. Don't listen to the likes of these folks who want to think that fire is good. You want a home you can live in, a community you can trust, neighbors you respect. It's your country. Take it back. That's the point of Law and Legitimacy. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, Mike. Mike, how do people find us?
We're here. Well, now we'll be back here every day, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube Live. You can find us on X at LawPod Daily. Please go back to following us over there at LawPod Daily. And you can also find us on our podcast platforms in audio-only format. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find podcasts. Norm, it's great to be back, and thank you all for hanging in there while we arbitrage some vacation, right, and pretended to have technical issues instead of a marital crisis. Kidding. All right, Norm. I will see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.